I didn't know my life was about to change in the span of 90 seconds, but it started with my boyfriend leaning close at a black tie gala and whispering something that made my stomach turn. "Don't speak unless I tell you to." I smiled like I hadn't just been reduced to furniture. I stepped back, exactly the way he wanted, and let him keep talking like I wasn't even there. The room was full of people who looked expensive on purpose. Politicians, CEOs, old money families, the kind of crowd my boyfriend lived for. I'm 36, and for the past 2 years, I'd been dating a man I thought was ambitious, driven, impressive. He worked in corporate finance, always networking, always climbing. At first, I respected it. I run a small tech consulting firm. Nothing flashy, but steady and comfortable. I'd built it with my own hands, and I was proud of it, even if I didn't package it like a pitch deck. Somewhere along the way, his interest in me stopped being real. About 6 months in, I started feeling like an accessory. He'd introduce me with a polished smile, say my name, then pivot the conversation back to himself. If anyone asked me a question, he'd answer for me or steer them away. When I brought it up, he'd brush it off like he was doing me a favor. "I'm helping you network," he'd say, like I was the one who didn't know how to speak. That gala was supposed to be his night, his company's charity fundraiser. He'd been stressed for weeks, obsessing over details, making it clear I needed to look the part. So I did. I wore the right dress, the right heels, smiled at the right people, played the game. Then he whispered that sentence. And I obeyed, because we were surrounded by his colleagues, and I didn't want to give him a scene he could use against me later. But moments later, the billionaires stopped mid-conversation. One of them looked past everyone in the room, locked eyes with me, and asked the host something that instantly shifted the entire atmosphere. My boyfriend's face changed in real time. Confusion, shock, calculation. Because the man walking toward us wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me. And I realized, standing there silent by instruction, that the most powerful thing in that room wasn't money or status. It was the moment someone finally saw me. Before that night, before the chandeliers and the orchestra, and the whisper that told me to stay quiet, I truly believed I was in a grown-up relationship, the kind built on mutual respect, shared ambition, and understanding. I was 36, running a small tech consulting firm I'd spent years building from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. Clients trusted me. My team respected me. I slept well at night, knowing I was in control of my own work. When I met Ethan at a mutual friend's birthday party 2 years earlier, he seemed different from the men I'd dated before. Confident, sharp, always talking about deals and strategy. He worked in corporate finance and moved through rooms like he belonged in them. When we first talked, he asked about my company and actually listened. Or at least, that's what I thought. In the beginning, he made me feel interesting. He liked telling people I ran my own firm. He'd brag about it in that subtle way that sounded supportive. I mistook that for pride. About 6 months in, something shifted. At events, he'd introduce me with a quick smile and my name, then immediately redirect the conversation back to himself. If someone asked me a follow-up question, he'd answer for me. If I tried to explain what I did, he'd interrupt gently and simplify it, like he was translating for an audience he didn't trust me to handle. The first time I mentioned it, he laughed. "I'm just helping you network better," he said. "These people don't have long attention spans." I let it go. Over time, it became a pattern. He'd steer people away from me at dinners. He'd joke that I was more behind the scenes. When I asked why he never let me finish a sentence at events, he told me I was overthinking it, that I was sensitive, that I should trust him. And I did. Because outside those rooms, he could be charming, affectionate. He'd talk about the future, about how powerful we could be together. I convinced myself that what I felt at events was just insecurity, not intuition. His family loved him. They talked about his drive, his potential, his career like it was a fragile thing that needed protecting. Around them, I felt pressure to be low maintenance, easy, supportive. I learned quickly that questioning him made things uncomfortable, and I hated being the reason a room went quiet. So I adjusted. I dressed the way he liked. I spoke less at his work functions. I told myself that compromise was part of partnership, that letting him lead in his world didn't mean I was smaller. But it added up. By the time the gala came around, I was already shrinking without realizing it. I'd stopped talking about my projects unless asked directly. I'd stopped correcting him when he glossed over my work. I'd started positioning myself half a step behind him without thinking. The gala wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was just the first time he said the quiet part out loud. And I finally heard it. After I started noticing how often Ethan spoke over me, I tried to convince myself it wasn't intentional, that it was just his personality, that some people naturally dominate conversations, especially in rooms where status mattered. I told myself love meant adapting, not keeping score, but the moments kept stacking up. At a dinner with his colleagues, one of them asked how we'd met. I opened my mouth to answer, smiling, ready to tell the story. Ethan jumped in immediately, telling it his way, turning me into a supporting character in my own introduction. When I laughed and tried to add something, he placed a hand lightly on my arm and said, "Let me finish this part," like he was calming a child. I remember the heat creeping up my neck, the way my smile stiffened. No one else noticed. That made it worse. Later that night, I brought it up gently. I told him it felt like he didn't trust me to speak for myself. He looked genuinely surprised. "You're reading too much into it," he said. "I'm just better at navigating these conversations. I'm protecting you." Protecting me from what? From being myself? Another time, at a networking mixer, someone asked what kind of tech work I did. Before I could answer, Ethan laughed and said, "She handles the boring but necessary stuff." The group chuckled politely. I stood there, holding my drink, feeling something sink in my chest. When I confronted him later, he rolled his eyes. "You need to lighten up. It was a joke." Every time I pushed back, he reframed it as my flaw. Too sensitive, too serious, too caught up in details that didn't matter. And every time I softened, afraid of becoming the difficult girlfriend who couldn't take a joke or read a room. His friends reinforced it without realizing they were doing it. They'd talk around me, not to me. Ask Ethan questions even when I was standing right there. And when I did speak, conversations would subtly redirect, like the group had an unspoken agreement about where attention belonged. I started noticing how often Ethan positioned himself physically between me and others, how he'd guide me away with a hand at my back when someone showed interest in my work, how he'd answer texts mid-conversation but expect my full attention when he spoke. At home, things felt normal enough, comfortable, safe. That contrast kept me confused. I told myself that if he truly didn't respect me, I'd feel it everywhere, not just in public. But the truth was, public spaces were where power mattered most to him. The gala loomed in his calendar for weeks, and with it, his anxiety. He talked about the guest list constantly. Who would be there? Who needed to see him? Who he couldn't afford to disappoint? He scrutinized everything, his suit, his talking points, even the way I laughed at his jokes. "Just follow my lead," he told me one night while we were getting ready for another event. "These rooms aren't forgiving." That sentence stayed with me. By the time the gala arrived, I already knew what was expected of me. Be supportive, be polished, be quiet unless spoken to. Don't take up space that wasn't offered. When he whispered, "Don't speak unless I tell you to," it didn't shock me the way it should have. It confirmed something I'd been avoiding. And once confirmed, it couldn't be unlearned. The gala was everything Ethan had promised it would be. Excessive, impeccable, intimidating in the way only extreme wealth can be. The hotel ballroom glowed under massive chandeliers, lights scattering across polished marble and crystal glassware. A live orchestra played softly, just loud enough to remind everyone this wasn't an ordinary night. Servers moved through the crowd like choreography, champagne flutes balanced perfectly on silver trays. Ethan was in his element the moment we stepped inside. He straightened his jacket, smiled that practiced smile, and began greeting people like he was running for office. Air kisses. Handshakes held just a second longer than necessary, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, nodding gravely at comments that didn't matter. I followed beside him, doing exactly what I'd learned to do. Pleasant, agreeable, invisible. For the first hour, it was all standard. Introductions. Small talk. Me standing slightly behind him while he talked about market shifts and quarterly performance. When people asked how we knew each other, he said my name and immediately redirected the conversation. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. Then, while we were standing with a group of his colleagues, he leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. "Don't speak unless I tell you to," he whispered. "This is important for my career, and I need to control the narrative." The words landed heavier than I expected. Not because they were loud or cruel, but because they were said like instructions, like I was something to manage. I looked at him. He didn't look back. Just smile and nod, he added. You tend to ramble, and I can't afford any awkwardness tonight. We were surrounded by people, music, laughter, eyes everywhere. So I smiled. Sure, I said quietly, and stepped back, placing myself at the edge of the circle. He didn't even notice. That's when I started to detach. I sipped my drink slowly, watching the room with a distance I hadn't felt before. And that's when I saw him. Across the ballroom, talking to a small group, was an older man in an immaculate suit, mid-60s maybe. He didn't need to raise his voice or gesture dramatically to command attention. People leaned toward him naturally, like gravity did the work for him. It took me a moment to place him. Then it clicked. He was one of the most powerful venture capitalists in the country. I'd read about him, seen him interviewed. He'd made billions by investing early in companies that reshaped entire industries. What Ethan didn't know, what he'd never asked about deeply enough to learn, was that this man and I weren't strangers. 5 years earlier, when my firm was still small and scrappy, I'd been brought in to consult on a security audit for one of his portfolio companies. It was supposed to be a short engagement, 3 months, but I'd impressed him. We'd talked strategy over dinner, stayed loosely in touch. He'd even offered to invest in my company once. I'd declined. I wanted control. He hadn't seen me yet. I wasn't planning to approach him. Honestly, there was something almost ironic about standing there, invisible to my boyfriend, while knowing someone in the room whose net worth eclipsed everyone else combined. Then the man scanned the room. His eyes moved past faces, conversations, clusters of people, until they landed on me. He froze mid-sentence, actually paused. Then he looked again, more carefully, and locked eyes with me across the ballroom. I gave him a small nod. He said something to his group, excused himself, and started walking straight toward us. The shift in energy was immediate. Conversation slowed. People turned. When someone like him moved with purpose, everyone noticed. Ethan noticed too. The man walked directly up to me, extending his hand. I thought that was you, he said warmly. How long has it been? 3 years? 4? 5, I replied, shaking his hand. Good to see you. Ethan's face cycled through confusion, shock, and calculation in seconds. The gala host appeared instantly, practically materializing at the man's side. Is she on the donor list? The man asked casually. The host stammered. I'm not sure. I can check. Don't bother, he said. Put her down for whatever the top-tier contribution is. Send me the invoice. Make sure her name is displayed prominently. The host nodded frantically, already typing. Ethan finally found his voice. You two know each other? The billionaire looked at him like he was noticing him for the first time. We do, he said. She did some of the best consulting work I've seen for one of my companies. He turned back to me. Are you still running your firm? I am. Good. I've got a project that could use your expertise. Let's have lunch next week. He smiled once more, nodded, and walked away. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. But nothing in that room was the same afterward. The moment he walked away, the noise rushed back into the room. Conversations restarted, laughter returned, music swelled slightly louder than before. But for me, everything felt muted, like I was standing underwater watching people move above the surface. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He stood there, frozen for half a second too long, then laughed a little too loudly and adjusted his jacket like nothing had happened, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. His jaw was tight. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Then his hand clamped around my arm. Why didn't you tell me you knew him? He hissed under his breath, leaning close enough that no one else could hear. I looked at him calmly. You told me not to speak unless you gave permission. His grip tightened. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Do I? I asked quietly. His face flushed. You know important people like that, and you've just been hiding it. I gently pulled my arm free. I haven't been hiding anything. You've never asked about my work in any real way. You just assumed. That's not fair, he snapped. You literally told me to stay quiet because I might embarrass you, I said. How is that fair? People nearby were starting to glance over. Ethan noticed immediately. His voice dropped. His expression rearranged itself into something smoother. We'll talk about this later, he said through a tight smile. Sure, I replied. But he couldn't let it go. For the rest of the night, he hovered, suddenly attentive, suddenly proud. Whenever someone approached me to ask about my connection to the billionaire, Ethan was right there, laughing too loudly, touching my arm, inserting himself into the conversation like he'd always been supportive. It was painfully transparent. And people noticed. I could see it in the way eyebrows lifted, in the brief pauses before people responded to him, in the way attention kept drifting back to me despite his efforts to redirect it. Around 10 o'clock, just before the formal program began, the host approached us again. "We'll be recognizing major donors on stage shortly," she said, smiling brightly. "You'll be included, thanks to the contribution made on your behalf. Would you like to say a few words?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "That would be wonderful," he said quickly. "She'd love to." The host looked at me for confirmation. I nodded. "Happy to." As soon as the host walked away, Ethan leaned in again, panic flickering behind his eyes. "What are you going to say?" "I'll figure it out." "Don't mention your company," he snapped. "This isn't about self-promotion." "I wasn't planning to." "And keep it brief," he added. "Nobody wants to hear you ramble." That's when I really looked at him. Not the charming finance guy, not the ambitious networker, but the man standing in front of me, desperate to manage how I was perceived, afraid that if I spoke freely, I might outshine him. He didn't see a partner. He saw a liability. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage calmly. The room quieted instantly. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, waiting. I thanked the organization, spoke sincerely about why the cause mattered to me, kept it short, respectful, exactly what was asked. Then, just before stepping away, I added one final sentence. "I'd also like to thank my boyfriend," I said evenly, "who reminded me earlier tonight not to speak unless given permission. It seems I finally got permission." For half a second, the room went silent. Then came confused laughter, nervous murmurs, a ripple of realization. I didn't look at Ethan. I walked off the stage and went straight to the bar. And for the first time all night, I felt completely in control. He found me 20 minutes later. I was standing at the bar, fingers resting lightly on the stem of a glass I hadn't really been drinking from, watching the room with a calm I didn't expect to feel. The orchestra had shifted into something livelier. People were laughing again, but the energy around us was different now. Charged, curious, slightly off balance. "What the hell was that?" Ethan demanded, sliding in beside me. I didn't turn right away. "What was what?" "You know exactly what I mean," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You humiliated me up there." I finally looked at him. I stated a fact. "You made me sound controlling in front of people who matter for my career." "Did I make you sound controlling?" I asked evenly. "Or did I reveal that you are controlling?" His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced around, clocking the eyes that were already drifting toward us. Instinct kicked in. His posture softened, his tone recalibrated. "I was trying to help you," he said. "You're not good at these events." "According to who?" I asked. "You?" "Because I seem to be doing just fine now that you're not managing every word out of my mouth." "I'm being honest," I cut in. "There's a difference." He took a step closer. "This isn't over. We're leaving." "You can leave," I said. "I'm staying." His eyes widened, just a fraction. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said. "Go home. I'll get a cab later." "You came here with me," he said, the edge creeping back into his voice. "You'll leave with me." "No," I replied, calm as ever. "I really won't." He stared at me, waiting for the familiar softening, the retreat, the apology. It didn't come. Around us, people pretended not to watch while absolutely watching. Finally, he turned on his heel and stormed out. I watched him go and felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, no spike of adrenaline, just a quiet certainty settling into place. I ordered another drink. Around midnight, when the crowd had thinned and the lingering conversations turned intimate, the venture capitalist approached me again. "That was quite a speech," he said, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Too much?" "Not at all," he said. "Clearly there's a story there." "Not one worth telling," I replied. He nodded, accepting the boundary. "My offer for lunch stands. I meant what I said about the project. But more than that, you seem like someone who could use a conversation outside your immediate circle." "I might take you up on that." "Please do," he said. "And for what it's worth, I've been where you are. Someone who wanted the benefits of your success, not the reality of who you are. It doesn't get better. It just gets more expensive to extract yourself." "Noted," I said, and meant it. We talked for another half hour. Not about business, about life. About choices that look small until they aren't. About boundaries learned too late. When I finally left, it was nearly 1 a.m. My phone buzzed nonstop on the ride home. 17 missed calls, 30 messages. I didn't read them. I unlocked the apartment Ethan and I shared, set my keys down, and went straight to sleep. In the morning, he was already there. He'd let himself in with his key and was sitting on the couch like he'd been waiting all night. His tie was gone. His shirt wrinkled. His expression set. "We need to talk," he said. Sure. You embarrassed me, he said. You made me look bad in front of people who matter. I told the truth, I replied. If that embarrassed you, that's on you. You made it sound like I was abusing you. You told me not to speak unless you gave permission at a public event because you thought I'd embarrass you, I said. How would you characterize that? Silence. I was stressed, he said finally. These events are important. More important than treating your partner with basic respect? I asked. That's not fair. It's completely fair, I said. You've been treating me like an accessory for months. Last night just made it impossible to ignore. I have not. Yes, you have, I said. You answer for me. You steer people away. You introduce me and immediately change the subject. You've made it clear you think I'm less than you. That's not true. Then why did you tell me not to speak last night? Silence again. Because you were worried I'd say something that didn't fit your narrative, I continued. That someone would realize I'm not just decorative, that I have my own career and connections. You're twisting this. I'm not, I said, and I'm done pretending it's okay. He stood up abruptly. What does that mean? It means we're over. His face went blank. You're breaking up with me over one comment. Over months of comments, I said. Last night just made it undeniable. You're being ridiculous. We've been together 2 years, I said. 2 years where you consistently made me feel small. That's not a relationship. That's a power dynamic. He grabbed his bag. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but I doubt it. He dropped his key in the hallway. The lock clicked behind him. And just like that, the noise stopped. The apartment felt too big after he left. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Just empty. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones once the adrenaline fades. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door like it might open again, like he might come back with another argument, another accusation, another reason I was supposed to feel guilty. It didn't. I walked through the room slowly. The living room where we'd hosted dinners for his colleagues, the kitchen where he'd talked about deals while I cooked, the bedroom where I'd lain awake more nights than I wanted to admit, wondering when I'd started feeling like a supporting character in my own life. That night I didn't cry. I poured a glass of water, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my phone. The screen lit up again and again. Messages I still hadn't read. Missed calls stacking into a number that felt absurd. I knew what they'd say without opening them. Anger, blame, justification. A last-minute attempt to reframe what had happened. I turned the phone face down. For the first time since the gala, fear crept in. Not fear of losing him, fear of what came next. We shared this place. We shared routines, mutual friends, a social world that overlapped more than I liked. Walking away wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. It meant explaining, packing, rebuilding. It meant being alone in a way I hadn't been for a long time. And underneath all of that was a quieter fear I didn't want to face. What if I had overreacted? That thought showed up like an old reflex. He'd trained it into me over months. Every time I'd questioned him, he'd framed it as my problem. Too sensitive, too dramatic, too reactive. Now, standing alone in the quiet, those words echoed back, trying to reclaim space. I replayed the night in my head. The whisper, the stage, the look on his face when control slipped, the way he'd demanded I leave with him, the certainty in my own voice when I said no. My body didn't lie. My shoulders hadn't tensed when I broke up with him. My breath hadn't caught. I'd felt calm, clear. That mattered. Still, doubt is persistent. I slept poorly that night, woke up too early, lay there listening to the city wake up, wondering how someone could be in your life for 2 years and still not see you at all. In the morning, the first thing I did was pack a bag. Not everything, just enough. Clothes, laptop, essentials. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to negotiate my decision. I left a short note on the counter. Simple, direct. I needed space. I'd be back later for the rest. Then I left. At my friend's place, the emotions finally caught up with me. Not in a dramatic breakdown, but in a slow release. I talked it through, said things out loud I'd never admitted before. How small I'd felt, how often I'd edited myself, how relieved I felt now that I didn't have to. That relief scared me more than the sadness, because it meant the relationship had been wrong long before it ended. Over the next few days, the messages changed tone. Fewer accusations, more apologies. He wanted to talk things through, wanted me to be reasonable, wanted to fix what I broke. I didn't respond. The darkest moment wasn't when he left. It was when I realized how close I'd come to accepting a life where silence was the price of being loved. And once you see that clearly, there's no unseeing it. The shift didn't come with fireworks. It arrived quietly, the way real clarity always does. A few days after I left the apartment, after the shock wore off and the silence stopped feeling threatening, I sat alone in my friend's kitchen with a cup of coffee I'd reheated twice without drinking. My phone was on the table, face down, like a truce I'd negotiated with myself. I hadn't read his messages. I didn't need to. I already knew the pattern. First anger, then blame, then regret, then promises to change. I'd lived that cycle in smaller versions for months. What finally broke through wasn't something he said, it was something I remembered. 5 years earlier, when my firm was barely staying afloat, I'd made a decision not to take outside investment because I didn't want anyone else controlling my direction. People told me I was being stubborn, that I was afraid, that I'd regret it. I didn't. I'd chosen autonomy over approval once before. I'd just forgotten what that felt like. That morning, I opened my laptop and started working like I used to. Not reactively, not in between emotional spirals. Just focused, present. I answered client emails, reviewed proposals, scheduled meetings. The version of me who existed before I'd started shrinking came back faster than I expected. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was the venture capitalist. "I wanted to check in," he said. "Not about the project, about you." I hesitated for half a second, then told him the truth. That I'd ended things. That it had been building for a long time. That the Gala had just forced it into the open. He listened without interrupting. "When someone asks you to disappear so they can shine," he said, "they're telling you exactly who they are. Believe them the first time." Something in my chest loosened when he said that. Not because he validated me, but because he named something I'd been circling around for months. We talked for a while, about boundaries, about the difference between ambition and insecurity, about how often women are taught to interpret disrespect as support if it's wrapped in the language of success. When the call ended, I felt steady. Not euphoric, not vindicated. Steady. That evening, I went back to the apartment while Ethan was at work. I packed the rest of my things calmly, methodically. I didn't rush. I didn't linger either. I left the key on the counter, no note this time. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. On my way out, I paused at the door, not to grieve, to acknowledge. I'd outgrown the version of myself who accepted conditional respect. That was the turning point. Not the gala, not the speech, not even the breakup. The moment I stopped asking for permission to exist fully in my own life. I texted him once, and only once. "I'm done. Please don't contact me again." He replied almost immediately. "You're making a mistake." I didn't answer. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to be understood. I wasn't trying to win. I was choosing myself without an audience. And that changed everything. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then public, then strangely anticlimactic. For a few days after I sent that final message, my phone stayed silent. I almost believed he'd accepted it, that he'd moved on, that the chapter had closed cleanly. Then the questions started. Mutual friends reached out, cautiously at first. "Are you okay? What happened?" "Ethan seems really shaken." I answered politely and briefly. I didn't tell stories. I didn't defend myself. I just said we'd broken up and I was doing fine. That restraint seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. He started telling his version, that I'd embarrassed him, that I'd overreacted, that I'd sabotaged his career moment. A few people believed it, at least initially, but the story didn't hold up for long. Too many people had been in that room. They'd seen the way he hovered, the way he tried to manage me once attention shifted, the way his smile cracked when control slipped. They'd heard the line on stage, and even if they laughed, they'd understood it, not as a joke, as a reveal. Word traveled quickly in his circles. The same ones that prized optics and composure didn't appreciate what they'd witnessed, not because of me, but because of him. The whispering, the public tension, the obvious insecurity. I didn't add to it. I didn't need to. The lunch with the venture capitalist happened the following week. We met at a quiet restaurant I'd never heard of, tucked away from the noise. We talked about the project first. Terms, scope, timelines. It was challenging work, exactly the kind I loved. We shook hands and agreed to move forward. Then we talked about life. He told me about his divorce decades earlier, about how success can distort relationships if you let it, about the people who love the idea of your achievements more than the person behind them. "It doesn't get better," he repeated. "It just gets more expensive to leave." That line stayed with me. Over the next few months, my business grew, quickly but organically. I hired more staff, took on bigger clients, moved into a better office, not because of him alone, but because I'd stopped shrinking. I stopped filtering myself. I stopped apologizing for competence. Ethan tried to reach out twice, once through a mutual friend, asking if I'd meet him for coffee, once via email, long and reflective, full of admissions and regret. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to resolve. I heard through the grapevine that his company hadn't been thrilled with his behavior at the gala. The optics mattered to them. Multiple people had commented. It wasn't a formal reprimand, but it wasn't nothing. A few months later, he was quietly moved off high-visibility projects. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt detached. 6 months after the gala, I ran into him by accident at a coffee shop. He was alone, working on his laptop. He saw me, hesitated, then waved. I walked over. 5 minutes, I said. He looked different, less polished, tired. I've been thinking a lot, he said, about us, about how I treated you. I'm glad, I replied. I was insecure, he admitted. I tried to control things because I felt threatened. I know, I said. Is there any chance? No, I said gently. The version of you who did that didn't appear out of nowhere. That's who you are under pressure. I don't want to build a life worrying about that. He nodded, eyes on his coffee. That's fair. We parted politely. No anger, no nostalgia, just clarity. A year later, I saw him again at another charity event. He was there with someone new. I waved. He waved back. That was it. The fallout wasn't about watching him fall. It was about realizing I didn't need to be there to see it. It's been a year since that gala. A year since I stood in a room full of chandeliers and champagne and realized I had been slowly disappearing in a relationship I thought was love. When I look back now, what surprises me most isn't how badly Ethan treated me in public. It's how long I convinced myself it was normal. How easily I translated control into support, dismissal into guidance, silence into being mature. My life is quieter now, fuller too. My business is thriving, not because someone powerful noticed me that night, but because I finally stopped letting someone else narrate who I was allowed to be. I work with clients who respect my expertise. I hire people who listen when I speak. I walk into rooms without checking myself first, without wondering if my presence is an inconvenience. I'm dating someone new, slowly, intentionally. He asks about my work and actually waits for the answer. He doesn't flinch when I speak with confidence. He doesn't need me smaller to feel secure. That difference alone feels like freedom. I sometimes think about that whisper at the gala. Don't speak unless I tell you to. It wasn't just a sentence, it was a worldview. A belief that love means obedience. That ambition justifies control. That partnership requires one person to shrink. The night I spoke on that stage wasn't about embarrassing him. It wasn't about proving anything to the room. It was the first time I chose myself publicly, without apology, without fear of consequences. And the consequences turned out to be everything I needed. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening takes from this, it's this. If someone asks you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger, that isn't love. If someone needs you silent to succeed, they don't deserve to stand beside you. And if speaking your truth costs you a relationship, then that relationship was already costing you too much. That gala was supposed to be about his career, his ambition, his moment. Instead, it became the night I reclaimed my voice. The night I realized I never needed permission to speak, to succeed, or to walk away from someone who treated me like an accessory instead of a partner. And everything good in my life now came from that single decision.